Hey guys, welcome back to this tutorial. I'm so excited. I hope you are as excited as I am. Now today we are going to be looking at loops in Python. Loops in Python are used to iterate over a sequence data type, and in the previous tutorial we've looked at different types of sequence data types ranging from list, tuples, dictionaries, sets. If you've not watched those tutorials, I would highly recommend you to go back and then watch them so you can get this concept a lot more better. So we use loops to iterate over, that is to go over each of the items in a sequence data type and perform a particular action on it. So here I've created a list item and I named it my list, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So basically, we have two types of loops in Python. We have the for loop and the while loop. Now let's look at the for loops. So to use the for loop, simply you just write for I in my list. You can replace I with anything. It is the iterator that would go over each of the items in the list. So you can replace I with anything. It can be A, it can be B, but usually most programmers use I. It is just like the default iterator, but you can use anything you want. So for I in my list, you print I. So it's saying for each item in my list, print each of the items. So let's execute this code, and you see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 printed out. So you can do a lot of things. Let's say you want to multiply all of these numbers by 2, by 3. You want to perform different operations on it. Instead of accessing those numbers one after the other and performing those operations, you can simply use a for loop and then you perform those operations on it. For example, I can say print I times 2. So let me execute this. You see, it's saying 2. So it goes over the first value, and that is 1. So it will print 1 times 2 for that first iteration. To print 2, it will go back to the list, to the second item, then 2 times 2, then it prints 4, then it goes back to the list, to the third item, like that and like that. So it performs the same operation on all the items in the list. Now sometimes you may need to just perform the operations on few items and not everything. So you can use break statements here. So what do I mean by this? You can just say, okay, let's say you want to stop your iteration at 3, for example. So you can put a conditional statement that if I is equal to 3, then you break. Remember if statements, we looked at if statements in the previous tutorial. So they are conditional statements, and once this condition is met, it would execute what is inside this code. And here we are using the break. We are using the break statement. So the break statement is an inbuilt method in Python. So it will simply tell the iterator to stop and break out of the loop. So it will go for the first time for I in my list. If I is equal to 3, so since I is not equal to 3, it will not enter this block of code. So it will print this I times 2. It goes the second time 2, then if I is equal to 3, so I is not equal to 3, it will not execute this. But once I is 3, it will stop and break out of this loop. So let's execute this and see. You see we have just 2 and 4. We have just 2 and 4. So that is just a simple way to use the break statements if you just want to perform the operations on just few members of the sequence data types and not everything. You can simply just break out of the loop when a particular condition is met. You can also use a continue statement. Continue statements just means that it will not perform the operation on this particular number, but it will perform it on others. So let's see the output of this. So you see we have 2, 4, 8 and 10. So once I is equal to 3, it will go out. It will go back to the start of the iteration. It will not execute whatever is under this continue. So this one is just if you have situations whereby you do not want to perform the operation on a particular element or more than one element using some conditions. So you can state the conditions and you just put continue. So continue will stop at that particular point, but it would continue the iteration, while break will break out of the loop completely. I hope you get the difference between these two statements now. So that is just that about for loops. So most times you may want to, let's say I want to just create a simple multiplication table, or I can create a list using the range function. A range function in Python is a function that it generates numbers from whatever you indicate to where you indicate it to end. It accepts 3 arguments. Let's say print a range of 10. So normally this function accepts 3 arguments, but you can put 1. So we have the argument it accepts is the x. You can see the start, stop, and the step here. So the start is the number you want it to start from, then the stop where you want it to stop, then the step of each number. So let's say if you have 1, I want to start by 1 and it should end at 10, then it should step in 2. So it will be like 1, 3, 5, like that. So if I print this now, okay, I have 3 parentheses here. That's an error. That will give you an error. So you see, okay, sorry, I can't. This is something that has to return a value. I cannot use the print statement. So let me create a second list with this, and then print out my list. So you see, we have I'm printing my list here, and that is my list 2. So if you print this, you will not get it printed out. It will only print range 1, 10, and 2. So range of 1 to 10 on a step of 2. So to access these values now, you would use a for loop. So you can say for I in my list 2, print I. So if you print this, you see we have 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. So the range function is mostly used when you want to iterate over a particular number of sequence. So instead of having to create those numbers manually, you can just use the range function. But you cannot create a list manually with a range function like this. So unless if you add a list to this, a list of the Python inbuilt function. So if you add a list and print my list 2, let's see what we have here. So you see we have 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. So the only way to create a list using the range function is to add the list function. So if you remove the list function, it will only be a range object generated. So I hope you understand the concept of the range function. So apart from that, you can also have nested loops. What do I mean by nested loops? That is loops inside of loops. Let's say you have A equals a list of a range of, let's say, 0 to 10. So if you do not add the step, it will add a default step of 1. So this will generate 0 to 10. It will stop at 10. So it will not include 10 in the list. So and I have a B, and I create that manually using alphabets, and I say B, C, D, E, F, G H I and J. So I can use this for a nested loop, like for I in A, then I should have something like for I in B. Let me use another alphabet. For, let's say, for X in A and for Y in B, print X and Y. So you see, nested loops, you see you have 0, then it prints all of this for 0, then you have 1, and it prints all of it for A, B, C, D, E, F, G for 1. So this first loop is the outer loop. So for this to, so it will say for X in A is the range of 0 to 10. So for 0, that will be the first element of this list, 0. So for 0, then for Y in B, now we're still in 0. We're still in the first item, 0. So X is 0 here. So for Y in B, now print X and Y. So the default value of X now for this first iteration is 0. Then for Y in B, for it to finish this Y, it would complete the iteration for all the Y in B before it goes out for the second value of X. I hope you understand what I mean. So for X in A, for 0, that's the first item. Then for Y in B, so each of the Y in B, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, print X and Y. So you have, so this first time you have 0, and it will print out 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Then for all the values of this before it goes out of that loop, and then continues with this. So the loop will only end when all these iterations for this first one has finished. So when it's at the last value, that is 9, that is when the loop would end. And when you look at this, sorry, when you look at this, the loop ends at 9. So that is something about nested loops. So you can also use the pass statement. Like if you need to have a loop and you don't know what you want to have in it yet, you can just use the pass statement, so you won't get an error. So you can just say for I in my list, then pass. So this will not do anything. It will not do anything. To just remain the same, and you won't get any error. So that is that about loops in Python. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment section. I appreciate feedbacks, and please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more related content. Thank you.